Looks like we have 2 minutes until 7 o'clock, and we'll try to get started right at 7, but we might need to wait a little bit just to see who else might join us. Go ahead and fill those questions out if you haven't had a chance to. I am going to be posting the recipe for our pie tonight in the chat box. If you are new to Zoom, you can find the chat box along the bottom of your screen. You hover over the bubble that looks like a conversation bubble. You can ask questions that way and we will see them. We do have your cameras and your microphones turned off. That way we don't have any disruptions as Liz is going to be teaching us about pie baking. I see some more people joining us from different counties. Go ahead and fill out our poll questions that we have up on the screen so we know who's here joining us tonight. Questions such as, are you a 4-H member or an adult? What county do you live in? And how many people are watching from your location? We know that we had about 17 email addresses of people who signed up, but that means there could be more people watching from your location. We would just like to know that. Also, tell us about your experience baking a pie. I know sometimes that is, I think a pie can sometimes be a little intimidating for people. So that's why we're doing this workshop, so people learn more about that. And you might find that it's just as easy as baking other things. Liz is going to tell us all about it tonight. Again, welcome to our pie baking workshop, those of you who have just joined us. We're going to get started in a few minutes. Go ahead and fill out the questions on the poll there so we know who's joining us. If at any point tonight you have a question that you'd like to ask, you can feel free to record that in the chat box. And if you're new to Zoom, you can find that chat box listed along the bottom of your screen, and you just go ahead and type that in for us.
612 865 4691. All righty. All right. Have a good night. Okay, bye.
If you're just joining us, go ahead and fill in our poll questions. All right, look, we got about 10 people that are signed in here. Go ahead and fill out your poll questions if you haven't had a chance to do that. We would just like to know who's here and what your baking experience is like. We're going to get started here in maybe about a minute or two. In case you didn't hear, we are recording tonight. So just know that this will be available later on the Wright County 4-H YouTube page for us to view, for you to view. We're also going to have you ask your questions in the chat box tonight. So feel free to type those in. Let us know any questions you might have as we're going along, and I will let Liz know once she gets started what those questions are, because she's going to be busy with her hand in the pie crust dough for us too. So I think we will get started, Liz. It's 7:02, so I'm going to end the poll here. And I am actually going to mute myself and turn off my camera so Liz can take it away with her pie baking. Again, my name is Kelly Stry, and I am one of the 4-H extension educators in Wright County. And this is Liz Pato. She is the Wright County Fair Baking Open Class Superintendent, and she has done a face-to-face workshop for us at our 4-H Project Day. But she wanted to do a little bit more for us in our project experience. We are going to have baking classes this spring, but as we know, we cannot have face-to-face programming for extension programs until July 1st. So Liz offered to teach this class virtually, and we had one already. We had a quick bread class, which went very well, and now we're going to start with a little bit something more complicated with a pie. And then on Saturday, if you haven't signed up yet, we're going to have a yeast bread workshop as well. So I'm going to mute my camera and my microphone, and I will put the recipe for the pie in the chat box, so you're able to click on that and see what we're making. So go ahead, Liz.
All right, sounds good. Good evening. My daughter was in 4-H, and that's how I know about 4-H. And she did some baking, and she did the the food review. She did that a couple of times, and so she now competitively bakes along with me. We bake for the county fair. I bake for the Carver County Fair, and I've also baked for the state fair and won some ribbons down there. So I really enjoy baking. We're going to start with a real simple pie crust tonight, just because this is the pie crust that I first learned how to make. It's very simple, it's very easy, and you don't have to chill it. There are a lot of pie crusts out there that tell you to chill the pie crust before you roll them out. And there are a lot of pie crust recipes out there that use butter and shortening. This one, we're just going to use shortening. As I said, this one is very simple, but it turns out really good. It tastes delicious as long as we don't overmix it. Last week, we talked about quick breads, and we talked about a couple of different kinds of quick breads. We talked about the quick bread that we made, the blueberry lemon, and then we talked about biscuits. This dough, or this pie crust that we're going to make, is kind of like a biscuit, because we are going to incorporate our shortening into the flour, hopefully just so that it looks like small peas, and I'll show you that. So this, if you can see it, let me turn this down a little bit. This is a pastry cutter. There's many different types of pastry cutters. Some of them have a more sharper blade on them than this. You can also use 2 knives. You can also use your fingers. I actually have a mixer, and so I use my mixer nowadays to do the first step of this pie crust. So the first thing you're going to want to do is turn your oven on. When you start a recipe, read the recipe all the way through. Make sure that you have all your ingredients and get all of your utensils ready. And then the next thing you want to do is turn your oven on to the temperature that you're going to bake, so that your oven can preheat. Then we are going to start our crust. So this crust is 2 cups of flour. And if you remember from last week, I said you just lightly put it into your measuring cup and take a knife and even it out so that you have a flat cup of flour. That's 1 cup. And 2 cups. We'll need a little flour when we roll our pie crust out. And then we want a teaspoon of salt. There it is. So don't overfill it, just up to the edge. 1 teaspoon of salt. Okay, then this recipe calls for 3/4 of a cup of shortening. You can use Crisco from a can instead of these sticks. I just happen to have the sticks. They're just easier to use because I can measure it out by cutting. If you see right on here, it gives you the the teaspoons and the tablespoons, or the tablespoons, and tells you how much is a half a cup, 3/4, 2/3. So they're just handy to use. So we want 3/4 of a cup of shortening. And before we put this into the flour mixture, we're going to cut it up into some cubes. We're not going to put this whole bar the whole bar in. So as you can see, I've cut it into some pieces. So these pieces are what we're going to put into our pie crust mixture. All right, then it's going to get a little noisy because we're going to mix this up. What this does is it incorporates that shortening into the flour. And I will show you what it looks like as soon as it's done mixing.
Liz, could you show us how to use the pastry cutter if you don't have a mixer available?
Yep, we will do that also. We can do that also. All right, let's finish it with the pastry cutter. So not sure if you can see what it looks like, but I've got flour with mixture of the shortening pieces in there. And so, and if you were just going to use the pastry cutter, you would just push it down and scrape through. And if I hadn't used the mixer, there would probably be more pastry or pieces of shortening on here, and you can just use your knife to clean that off a little. And so you kind of want it to look like sand with a few big peas in it. Hopefully everybody can see that. Kelly, are you able to see that?
Yes, I'm able to see that, Liz. Thank you. Maybe hold it up just a little bit. A little bit higher. There you go.
There we go. Okay. Push this down a little bit, maybe. There we go. Okay. All right. Then it wants cold water. So the water that I have in my measuring cup has some ice cubes in it to keep it nice and cold. We want it nice and cold. And it says up to a half a cup. And what that means is some flour, some temperatures, it depends on just the time you make it. You might need a half a cup, you might only need a quarter of a cup. So what I'm gonna use is a tablespoon. And I'm just gonna put a few tablespoons in there. And mix it with your hands. So this part, we do not want to use the mixer because we don't want our pie crust to get tough. So I'm mixing it together. Hopefully you can see it's starting to come together. Still a little dry though, so we're going to put some more water in it. Okay, and that was about 6 tablespoons. So that was actually just about a quarter of a cup, and that's plenty. So again, you don't want to put the whole half cup in right away because you're probably not going to need it. We have a nice pie dough here. And this is going to make a 2-crust pie.
Liz, could you describe what it feels like so you know that your pie crust is mixed up correctly?
It's a little wet, but not real wet.
Sticky?
So nope, and you don't want it real sticky either. So as you can see, my hands aren't sticking and there's nothing's coming off with them. So you want it to hold together. So I'm going to cut this in half and set 1/2 aside. And the other half we're going to roll out. So we're going to put a little bit of flour down. I have a pastry board that I'm using. You can roll this out just right on the counter or even on your kitchen table. I'm going to hopefully start out with something like a round disc. Put that down on my flour, and I'm going to put flour on both sides of it. Get a little bit of flour on both sides. Now I use what's called a French rolling pin, so it doesn't have the handles. I'm sure most of you probably have. Me have this type of rolling pin. Either one works just fine. Now, when rolling out your pie crust, you definitely want to make sure that you have enough flour so that it's not sticking to your table or your board or your rolling pin. And you don't want to go hard and down. You want to be very light to the touch. And you can go backwards and forwards. Then I'm picking it up. I've got a nice piece here. I'm just going to turn it the other direction. And keep rolling it out until I think it's a little bit bigger than my pie plate. So here's my pie plate, and if I put it down in the middle of my pie crust, I can see that it's big enough now, that it's bigger than my pie plate. Now, the easy way to get this up, to put it in your pie plate, is to place your rolling pin at the edge and bring the pie crust up around and roll it. So as you can see, it's now on my rolling pin. The pie crust is rolled on my rolling pin. I can put the pie plate down, set the pie crust on the edge, the rolling pin on the edge, and roll my pie crust right into my pie plate. It's okay if you have to make a few adjustments, or if one part isn't quite as hanging over the edge as far as the other one. Or if you have to piece a little bit, that's okay too. Okay, for filling. For first-time pie bakers, it's perfectly acceptable to take canned pie filling and use canned pie filling. And you want to make sure that you're using pie filling because that is already seasoned for you. It's already got the sugar and the flour or tapioca in it to keep it from being runny. You don't want to use just canned fruit that you would have to use like a recipe for to add other ingredients to. Right now, my rhubarb is high enough, so I'll be baking a rhubarb pie this weekend. So if you've got rhubarb in your yard, rhubarb's great. Blueberries like we used last week. There's just all kinds of wonderful things. The peach pie, what I'm going to use tonight is a peach pie filling that I canned myself from peaches that I purchased last fall. What I had to do was I had to take those peaches and put them in a little bit of hot water on the stove, and that loosens up the skin of the peach, and then you can peel the peach. And I didn't want to have to try to do that tonight. So this is just canned pie filling, peach pie filling. And it went right into my pie. Okay, most canned pie filling that you buy in the store, you shouldn't have to do anything to. This pie filling that I just put in here, I just noticed is a little bit runny. So I'm actually going to try to add a little bit of cornstarch. I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of cornstarch over it to try to help it settle a little bit in the oven when it bakes. Most of your recipes are going to call for sugar, flour, and spices. And that flour is what's going to help keep all those juices from running all over the place. All right, so I'm going to set that aside while we roll out the top of our crust. Does anybody have any questions about rolling out pie crust?
Remember, you can type your questions in the chat box, so I'll read them to Liz so she knows.
It takes practice. So making homemade pie crust is really, really easy. If you use this simple recipe, it's very easy, and you can use it for, besides baking pies, you can use it for making a pot pie, a meat pie, a savory pie. You can use it for little tarts. You can use it for, little tarts that you would put in a small muffin tin and make a filling for. So
Liz, we have a question about the pie crust. Why does the water have to be so cold when making the pie crust?
It just helps bind the flour better and keeps the pie crust from getting tough. If you use hot water, your pie crust will get tough. So the colder, the better. Everything reacts with flour differently.
So we also asked a question in the chat box. What is everybody's favorite type of pie to eat? And so far, somebody said strawberry rhubarb.
Ooh, see? The rhubarb's ready. And I have actually found that if you don't have rhubarb in your yard and you drive down a road and you see somebody that has a rhubarb patch, you could probably stop and ask them if they'll give you some, because most of the time they will. I've done that.
Other answers are cherry pie, French silk pie, apple pie.
So, and for French silk pie, that's a filling that you would make on the stove, but you could use this same pie crust. But you would do something, you would pre-bake it. So you would put the pie crust, you would just need a bottom pie crust, you would put it in your pan, and once I put this on top, I'll show you how we're going to crimp the edges. But you would crimp the edges on that, and then put it in your oven and bake it.
So someone else said pumpkin pie, and you would do the same thing with a pumpkin pie crust too.
Pumpkin pie crust, yeah, you would just need the bottom pie crust, but you wouldn't bake it first.
Mary Grace says banana cream.
Oh yeah, that's my favorite.
Erica says that as well.
All right. So you can see how we have the top pie crust, and it kind of goes over a little bit on the edges there. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to even it out by cutting with a knife. Because we really don't need all that pie crust. And what you can do with leftover pie crust pieces, this is one of my husband's favorite things, is if I have a lot of pie crust pieces left over, I'll put them on a cookie sheet, just the odd pieces, sprinkle a little cinnamon and sugar on them, and put them in the oven and bake them for about 8 minutes, and you've kind of got a pie crust cookie.
Okay, Liz, someone asked, I like to use butter. Do you have any tips for a butter crust?
So you would make your crust the same way with butter, only don't use all butter. Use probably half and half, or 3/4 butter and 1/4 shortening. And if you're going to do a butter crust, you'll need to put it into the discs like I did, wrap them in wax paper and put them in the refrigerator for at least a half an hour. The butter is too warm when you incorporate it into your flour right away to be able to roll it out right away. So you have to chill a buttered pie crust.
So if you use butter, does it affect the taste of your pie crust?
Oh yeah, it makes it wonderful. It makes it delicious. In fact, that's pretty much the only pie crust I make nowadays is with butter. But because I wanted to give you a quick and easy demonstration in pie crust, and this pie crust that I'm making is very good. It's even though it's just made with shortening, it actually has really good flavor. All right, so I've cut the edges off of the pie, and now I'm going to take and fold them under. So there's a lip. Well, you've got the two pieces together, and I'm going to fold them under a little bit. Kind of sealing my pie filling in. So we're putting that underneath. And once you have that done, you can do a couple of things. You can take a fork and push the fork down in to kind of make a decoration in your pie crust, or you can just use your fingers and make little crimps in the pie crust to make it look pretty.
So as you're doing that, Liz, somebody asked, do you have to do different things to the filling for different types of filling? You talked about the cornstarch in there.
No, most of the time they're the same, because you're gonna, whatever fruit you're using, you're gonna want sweetener, which is sugar. You're gonna want some sort of spices, in an apple pie, you're gonna put cinnamon and nutmeg. In pumpkin pie, you're gonna put cinnamon and nutmeg and maybe allspice. In my cherry pies, I actually just like to do sugar and a little bit of almond extract. So recipes will say different things, but usually it's the same ingredients, although there are different products that you can use to thicken your pie with. You can use cornstarch, you can use flour, you can use tapioca, and there's also another product that you can purchase online called Clear Gel. And you can use any of those to thicken your pie. So what happens when you bake a pie and you've got this beautiful pie and it's apples, you know, and they're nice and high and you've got that sugar in there, they're going to make juice when they cook. All fruit is going to make some sort of juice when it cooks. And you have to be able to thicken that, or what's going to come out, your pie is going to come out all wet and you're not going to be able to get out a nice slice of pie. It's just going to run all over the place. So you have to have some sort of thickener in there. But basically a pie is those ingredients.
Liz, somebody's asking about a lattice crust top.
Oh,
How do you make a lattice top?
So you would just do the same thing that I did, pie crust, only you would cut nice strips.
So just before you go into the detail, a lattice top is the one that looks like a basket weave.
Yeah, so you would take you would take some strips like this. Make sure you can see. So a strip, and lay that across. And then you would put another one across like that, and another one like that. So you would have nice strips. Can you kind of see that there? So
going back to your pie filling, someone's asking how much thickener per cup of fruit?
So then that's where you are going to have something different. Everything is different. Every pie filling is different. So it will probably vary anywhere between 1/4 of a cup and 3/4 of a cup. It just depends on how juicy the filling is. And I actually don't like to use flour as much as I like to use cornstarch or Clear Gel. To me, it just makes a more clear juice in the pie, has a little bit better flavor, and you don't have to use as much. Sometimes I think when you have to put too much flour in, you end up with a floury taste. So for the top of this pie, what I like to do is I've got a whole egg that I'm whipping up here in a little dish. I'm going to add just about 3/4 of a tablespoon of water or so in there. And then I've got my pastry brush. And we're going to take that. We're just going to brush this nice egg wash all over the pie. And this is going to give their pie crust a nice brown caramel finish.
Did you use the whole egg or just the egg white?
I used the whole egg. You can do an egg white, an egg yolk, whatever you have. Actually, I used the whole egg, which is fine. Which is fine. You can use either one. Actually, I don't use egg whites very often. I'd prefer either the yolk or the whole egg. Then we want to make a few air holes. So I'm just gonna use my knife and try to make a pretty decoration in the top. Just a few air holes. And the last thing before it goes in the oven is I'm just going to sprinkle it with a little bit of sugar on top.
So Liz, one of the tricks that my grandmother taught me when I was learning how to bake a pie was that if you are baking more than one pie at the same time and with different fillings, your air hole, you should cut in the shape of the first letter of the filling so you know what kind it is.
Ah, that's a good idea. I never thought about that. I should put a P in my pie, shouldn't I? Let's see if
Someone
that-
is asking also, do you have to add the egg to the top of the pie crust?
No, no. A lot of times when I'm lazy or I don't have time, you do need air holes, or your pie crust is actually going to blow up a little bit. So poke a few air holes in, but you don't have to do an egg wash or sugar or anything. No. Nope, just put it in the oven. So this is ready to go in the oven.
How long should you bake it in the oven?
So in this, we're going to bake about 50 minutes at 400 degrees. And my husband just cleaned my oven for me today. So if you're worried about it going over in the oven at all, you can place a cookie sheet on the rack underneath the pie, so that if it boils over, it's not going to get all over your oven.
So while Liz is setting her timer, I'm going to just mention that we are having a yeast spread baking workshop on Saturday. I did put the sign up in the chat. You do need to pre-register by tomorrow evening so we can send you the Zoom link on Saturday morning so you can join us for that too. What other questions do you guys have for Liz? We can put your questions in the chat box and we can get those answered for you.
Longer. I hope it was okay.
Liz, how long have you been baking pie?
Longer than most of you have been around, a good 45 years.
And what's your favorite kind of pie?
Apple, not Honeycrisp, Haralson apple pie.
That sounds good.
Yeah, Haralson to me is the only apple to make an apple pie with. I will not make a pie with Granny Smiths. I will not eat a Granny Smith. If you want to make a pie at this time of the year, I would buy Honeycrisp, because you can still get those, and they actually make a really good pie. I will actually take Honeycrisp and Haralson and mix them in the fall.
One of the questions someone has is, any tips for freezing pie crust?
You know, I have frozen pie crust quite a bit, and the recipe that I just used, I would break it up into the 2 discs and wrap them good in wax paper and then put them in a plastic bag, and they're probably only good though for 6 months or less. After that, they tend to dry out.
I did put some questions up on the screen, so about our pie workshop today. While you're thinking of other questions for Liz, you could take a minute to answer those for us so we know if you found this to be helpful or not. Liz, I think my favorite pie is pumpkin pie. I like a pie without a top crust.
Oh, okay. And I love pumpkin pie, but I like the whipped cream better.
Or I also like, I have a recipe for an apple pie that has a crumbly crust over the top, which is also very delicious.
I do too.
What other questions do you have for Liz? I did put the recipe in the chat when we first started, so you can scroll back up if you missed that. I'm also going to be emailing that out to you after this, so you can have that for yourself. Okay, one other question. What are some of the different kinds of pies you have made?
Apple, cherry, blueberry, lemon meringue. My daughter's favorite is a chocolate cream or a French silk. My husband's is probably the apple, banana cream, coconut cream.
How about a sour cream and raisin one?
You know, I like that kind of pie, but I have not ever made one. I used to work in a restaurant that made that, and I would
Mm.
eat the sour cream raisins. So I do like that. Rhubarb, strawberry rhubarb, fresh strawberry.
Lots of different pie.
Yeah.
Another question I have for some Sam is, what's another easy pie for a clover bud to make? So clover bud would be kindergarten through second grade.
Well, I would use the pie crust that I just demonstrated. And as I said, any kind of canned pie filling that the clover bud likes. You know, if whatever their favorite is, I think would definitely be the easiest. And as long as they can talk to the judge about how they made the crust and how they made the pie, I think they'd be in good shape. For a clover bud, an easy pie would probably be, if you wanted to use real fruit, I would say probably blueberry, just because you don't have to do a whole lot with the blueberries except mix your sugar and flour or cornstarch and some season or some like cinnamon or something in with them, spices in with it, because you know, with an apple pie you have to peel the apples, with a peach pie you have to peel the peaches, for a cherry pie you actually have to cook the cherries on the stove for a little while. They could do a pumpkin pie, because that's pretty easy. That's just mixing up all of your ingredients in one bowl and putting it in your pie crust.
Another question, when you bake your apple pie, how do you get it so it doesn't sink so much?
When you put the top crust on, use your hands to push down as much as possible so that you're pushing those apples down into the pie as far as you can, and that crust into the pie. I usually do end up with some sinking of the pie crust, but not a whole lot when I do that. When you push them down, make sure that the apples are in there nice and tight, and your pie crust is around the apples nice and tight.
And one last question, when did you learn to make pies? Or maybe I'll put a twist on it. Who taught you how to make pies?
My grandmother. So I'm sure I couldn't have been more than 11 or 12. So I grew up with two grandmothers who baked a lot, and I spent a lot of time with both my grandmothers and learned how to bake.
That's
so
great.
I was very blessed to have family that knew how to bake and knew how to cook, that were willing to teach. I was the only granddaughter too, so that may have made a little bit of a difference. Everybody else was boys, so they were out hunting or fishing or out on the tractor.
Well, some boys like to make pies too, so
Well,
we
that's
will give
true.
them.
And they should.
Right.
So,
Any other last questions before we sign off? Make sure you fill out our evaluation questions for us if you haven't had a chance to do that, and sign up for our yeast spread. What kind of yeast spread are we making on Saturday, Liz? Or are you making, not we?
just white bread.
White bread.
Just a white bread, I think.
Join us for that.
Unless people would rather do sweet rolls, caramel rolls.
Why don't we start with white bread, and we can maybe schedule another one to do caramel rolls.
Yeah, I figured we should do white yeast spread, since that's what we did at the hands-on at the church, and that we weren't able to bake the bread this time. At least I'll have some baked so people will be able to see what it's supposed to look like.
Good. Any last words of advice for people as they are getting ready to bake their own pie now, Liz?
Just practice the pie crust. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid if your pie crust breaks and you have to piece it into the pie. Don't be afraid if it breaks and you have to piece it on top of your pie. It's still going to taste good. Don't ever throw anything away. Use it. Don't throw it. Just because it doesn't look pretty doesn't mean it's not going to taste delicious. And
I think that's good advice. So with that, we just want to say thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you, Liz, for showing how to make a pie tonight. That was great information.
A little bit longer, but I'm maybe too fast. I don't know.
I think you did just fine. So Thanks again for joining us from Wright and Meeker and Benton counties.
Yeah,
Good to see you all, and hopefully we will see you all on Saturday.
See everybody on Saturday. We'll have
Sounds
some
good.
fun.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.